everyone to This Week in Svelte, episode 116. Today with me there will be Ben, fellow Svelte maintainer. Sorry for my hairs, by the way. And we're gonna talk about like the pretty big supply chain, the pretty big supply chain attack that happened this week. And the reason why we're gonna talk about that is because Ben is also very active in the e18e, which stands for Ecosystem Performance Initiative, which basically is like an initiative to debloat your applications. And Ben is going to show us some pretty cool stuff that he worked on, because he did a wonderful job cleaning up a bunch of external dependency for Svelte stuff. And I mean, he generally, like, I think he cleaned up a bunch of the ecosystem, of the JavaScript ecosystem in general. Every now and then he opened up some PR in some random project by removing like 90% of the dependencies. But obviously before that we're gonna like join the changelog. We're gonna read the changelog together. So let's start with Svelte, obviously. And we can see that we have three new releases. There is a new release, 5.38.8, send effect.pending count to the correct boundary. So I suppose that this was one of the bugs that I remember. There was this bug where basically, so let's see. Prior to this PR, all pending count updates were forwarded to the nearest parent boundary with a pending snippet. This makes effective pending incorrect if you had nested boundary when our inner boundary didn't have a pending snippet. Oh, okay. So basically, if an inner boundary does not have a pending snippet, yeah, so yeah, okay, so basically effective pending was incorrect if you had nested boundaries, so a boundary within a boundary, and the inner boundary didn't have a pending snippet. So this is trying to fix that, and Rich opened an alternative PR to not do that, but just send the count to the right boundary. All right. So now the boundary also has a pending in itself. Oh gosh, as I've said, like I've been quite slacking ultimately on Svelte, and the async stuff, I think it's very, like, it would be a challenge to go back to the code base. Let's see, 5.38.9 released yesterday, generate CSS hash using the file name. So this was something that basically, as of today, like the CSS hash was generated. Like so when you use a Svelte component, when you have svelte.dev/playground, the CSS hash. So if you see, let me add a style tag here, button color red, for example, you can see that there is this .svelte n50 thing, and this is basically a hash generated, and before it was generated by the content of the file. So this also meant that if you changed something, like even just a single letter, you would get a different hash, which, I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but it is a bit of a big of a deal, because this means that it changes quite often. So as you can see, no, it was not changing anyway. I don't know if this is just, I can't remember. Like I remember like this was generated before by, we can actually see it. Let me open it. So like the problem is that if you are building, when you build, like it changes quite often. It's based on the content, on the contents of the style block. So it's just the style block, which means that they change quite often between deployments. And that's not necessary, because the only thing that you really care is if it, again, if we are back to 5.38.8, if I go to the CSS output and I change this to green, this is changing every time, you see? But if I switch to latest, now, even if I change this from green to red, the hash is not changing. This is it's fine. It's a small improvement, because this basically means that when you are redeploying your application, it doesn't change as often between deployments, which means that, for example, if you have some component and you only change the styles, the JavaScript of that component doesn't need to change. I don't know actually, but let me see. Changes frequently between deployments. It seems so unnecessary. Yeah. Yeah, I honestly, I don't know if this actually makes, gives you a bunch of, because it's true, it changes frequently between deployments, but also, then what? Because the code will change anyway, the hashes will change when the CSS change, and if the CSS change, the whole CSS will still change anyway. So yeah, you have more stable hashes now, which maybe it's, I don't know if it's better for someone. I don't see the problem really, but we'll see. But now you have more stable stuff. Correctly analyze object.property components. So if you have some component like this is considered a component in Svelte. And let me see why it was not correctly analyzed. Okay, so if you had the component within a snippet, it was not correctly transformed into a component. So is now fixed. Cleanup scheduling system. So I think again this is about the scheduling system of for the async work. There were some race conditions related to flash sync that are also being fixed, and in general I think it's just to make the whole system a bit more robust, and so it's not really it's not fixing bug, it's just make the code better and avoid unnecessary microtasks, I suppose. So yeah, in general, I think it's a bit more of a cleanup again. Yeah, cleanup. I think is the right sentence for this. It's not fixing any bugs. It's just making the code more coherent and a bit more structured in the right way. Transform input defaults from spread. So this is something that, so if you had a default, that during the advent of Svelte, we basically added the default value. So you can do default value, and if you do default value, it will be used when you reset the form, basically. But it was not working with spread, basically. So if you were spreading something like this, the default value was not correctly server-side rendered. And now it is. So it's a small fix. And by the way, I think this was also the first contribution for Diamond 113. So happy to have you on board as a contributor. It's always nice when there are some new contributors. Don't destroy contents of Svelte boundaries unless the boundary is an error boundary. So I think this was also like, this is one of a small step into the direction of async SSR, which I'm very excited about. I cannot wait for it. But yeah, basically, if you wrap some content in Svelte boundary and don't specify a failed snippet or an error handler, it will cause its content to be destroyed. So if there is an error, the boundary is completely destroyed. And now it only destroyed the content if the boundary has a failed snippet or an error. So it's basically like, this is more important now, because with Svelte boundary, like with async, if you are using async, you need to wrap something in Svelte boundary. And before this PR, if you wrap a piece of code in Svelte boundary to use a wait within that part, an error, it would basically destroy the content, even if you didn't have a failed or an error on there. So you could basically do nothing. So yeah, that's a nice addition. And we also have a fixed flush effect scheduled during boundary pending phase. So if there are any scheduled effect during the pending, they are being flushed, I suppose, after the pending resolve. So if you are scheduling some, let me see. If you're scheduling something, oh, there is a lot of stuff. Like closes a bunch of stuff. Yeah, so this was actually a pretty decent, like a pretty big bug. So it's good that it's fixed, because basically if you had a situation like this, when you scheduled an effect after the first await, this never run. So we are in version 5.38.6, and as you can see, like this effect actually never runs. If you schedule it before the first await, it runs, but if you schedule it after the first await, it doesn't. And this PR is actually fixing this. So now those effects are still scheduled, which is good, because this was a pretty big bug that was, and in fact, as you can see, like it was, it basically fixed a bunch of stuff here. Yeah, so I just want to see the other thing that, yeah, attachment in async await component is not working because attachment uses effect under the hood, so it was not working. It's also closing this. Top level await prevent on mount bind this from running. Again, on mount under the hood is using effect, and this one. So all attachment and action are broken in a component with an await in the script block. It's still the same basically. So yeah, this was a pretty decent bug. Again, pretty expected, because like it's still in like it's still an experimental flag, but luckily people are actually using it so that we can discover this bug before we remove the experimental flag. Let's see what's new in SvelteKit. So we have 4 new releases. One of which is pretty interesting. SvelteKit 2.37.1 serialized server load data before passing to universal load to handle mutation and promises. So basically, you can read the load function. You can read data from the server load into the universal load, and it was not serialized before. So if you returned a promise, I think it was actually crashing or something like that. Resolve root prevent dropping a trailing slash of ID. So if you're using resolve root, it was like dropping the trailing slash. Trailing slash are something that like I feel like they are the worst thing in the world because I always have a problem with trailing slash, like when to add it, when to not add it. It's very annoying. Assign correct status code to form submission error on the client. So I think this was a problem that was often like that often come up, and it's the fact that if you are doing something like this, yeah, so basically like if you return error 400, really in reality we are just throwing an error in SvelteKit, and it's then catched by the enhance function, and the status here was the wrong one because we are just throwing a 500 error, and now it's instead assigning the right status code. So if you throw a 400, you actually get a 400 back and not just a 500. So you can see that before it was just throwing an HTTP error, a 500 HTTP error, and we were reading that error within the thing. But now if you pass an error, we actually like throw that specific error, which is better. Let's see, we have unproxy form.result. So I think form.result is a proxy, and this was probably causing some problem. Let me see. Yeah, it should probably. So my form.result, it was initially initialized with state, but this means that you can technically like assign to result dot something and get it to react, and it's not recommended. And so just like $up/state, for example, now it is a state.row, which might be annoying for someone because they wanted deep reactivity, but you can always get deep reactivity if you really, really want with a writable derived. State.row is in general better because that's something that SvelteKit handles, and you want to react to it and not mutate it. This is the one that I was very excited about. There is a new remote function which is query.batch. So queries normally are not batched. So if you invoke like 10 queries, it will be invoked. I wonder if there is some documentation already about it. I suppose yes. So let's actually go and read the documentation for this. So query.batch, which is basically the same as query, except that it batches requests that happen within the same macro task. So what it means is that basically if you do something like this, so you have this get query, which is a query.batch, you are fetching from the DB and then returning like a new map, returning a function that will get the city, basically. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know about this. It must return a function of the form input index output. So it will call this with each of the input arguments to resolve the individual call with their result. So basically the point is this query.batch, you fetch, like this is a sort of a setup for the query.batch, and this is the actual function that you are calling. So as you can see, when you do get weather, for example, here we are calling get weather with a different city ID every time, and this city ID is called, like, is passed to this function so that you can get the lookup here and you can get the result. So this is basically called only once, and that's the nice thing. Because again, if this was a normal query, you would basically query the DB multiple times, which is wasteful. So instead, with query.batch, what you do is that this function is only invoked once, and then this setup is run, and then this function is what is called multiple times to actually get the new value of city.id. So that's pretty like nice, because this way you don't have to do multiple DB calls. So that's a new kind of remote function, and that is always exciting. Enable redirect from queries. So this is something that it was not possible to do before. So if you were inside a query, you couldn't redirect to a different page. This is generally still not recommended, because like you should redirect on a post request, for example. Yeah, also Changelog, this time I hope I said your name correctly. It's also saying that it doesn't do multiple network call, it just do one network call, and then it just call the function. So it's nicer. And I think this is what enabled for redirect from queries. So the problem with this is that if you before we didn't enable redirect from queries, because if you then want to batch that by default, you couldn't do it, because headers needs to be sent immediately. But now that we have batch.query, redirects are actually enabled for queries. So now, so now you can basically also invoke redirect from within a query, and that will redirect to the right place. This is sometimes useful, for example, if you want to redirect if you want to redirect if no, you cannot redirect in command, I think. I don't know, I can't remember. But the point is that now you can actually redirect from the query. So within a query, you can, for example, check out and redirect to the login if it's not available. Remove empty nodes from serialized server load data. So yeah, if there are some empty node, which I think this is basically to shrink the payload. Oh, it was actually a bug. Let me see. Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, so it's because it's a promise, probably. All right, yeah. We must only add node if there is a node, and then remove the empty array items from string, like we do for branches already. All right, so this was a decent bug in SvelteKit that was fixed. Allow command from within endpoints. So this now basically allow you to call a command, a remote function command within endpoint, which means that you can create your endpoint, like your post endpoint, that then just call the command, like the remote function. And this can basically allow you to have a remote function, but also to expose that, for example, if you have a mobile app. So that's interesting. Lazy discover of remote function. So this is something that was that is also another very good feature for SvelteKit, because initially, like, remote function were basically discovered the moment you build. All the remote function needed to be discovered. What this unlocks is actually another possibility, which is the ability to have a remote function also in node modules. Because before, obviously, since they needed to be discovered like a priori, you cannot explore the whole node modules to find remote functions. I don't know if this is already enabled, because obviously there are some security concerns. So I don't know if you can already use a remote function within node modules after this PR, but this definitely unlocks that possibility. I will need to figure out if that's something that is doable. Yeah. Yeah, all right. But I mean, this is, in general, it's better. I remember also having a problem for remote functions where, like, if you were using it, even if like you were using it without a wait and you were not invoking a function before a certain moment. I can't remember the specific use case, but the point is, before they were basically invoked at least once, at least imported during the build time, and now instead they are lazily discovered, which is much better. Layout load data not serialized on error page. So if you were basically the load data, yeah, I mean, you already, it's pretty self-explanatory. So it was not serialized. So if you had a transformer or promise and stuff like that, it was not serialized on the error page. Fail pre-rendering when remote function fails. So this is also pretty, before it was not doing it. So if a remote function was failing, it was not failing pre-rendering, and now it is. Treat handle look redirect as part of remote function call as JSON redirect. What does it mean? I don't get the last part. So when redirecting from handle, the remote function call is detected, but if you then try to redirect the request, the redirect is attempted, but the following nav is also handled by the hook. But the user remains on the original page which called the original function. So I probably, like, if you redirect in the handle during a remote function, it was not actually redirected. Like the user was, the router was not actually changing. So nice, that is now fixed. Let's see if we have any other new package. There is a new release of adapter node, bundled serve version to 3.0.2, an update dependency to that, a new release of Vite plugin Svelte. Oh, this is enabling a roll down Vite optimization. So there is this optimization inline const that basically, like, it's a new feature of roll down. So if you are using roll down, which is the replacement for roll up, it was not inlining const. So roll up is pretty good at doing stuff like that. So if you have a const value and you are using that const value throughout your application, instead of using a variable and using a const, it's just taking the value and inlining that value in like whenever you're using the function. And it was not done by roll down, and now it is, but you need to enable it. And so, since it also uses this to have tree shaking working, because if you have an if variable, by the way, e18e.dev is also packaged from Ben, which you will see. It's my favorite package ever, because it's all the logic is inside the package JSON, and I love it. So that's basically exporting a const variable, which is always false, and it will always be false. And so if you are inlining the const, an if dev will become if false, and then it can be tree shaken. If you don't inline the const, it's not possible to do it, because you cannot know if that variable is a variable or not. There's two new releases of ESLint plugin Svelte, with disabling more rules in rules mode, restricting SvelteKit rules to SvelteKit, and false positive for components prop any. So it resolves some false properties, positive for no unused props. Sorry, there's also a fix for no top-level browser globals, false positive, like it's fixing a false positive for compound logical expression guards. That's a lot of big word. A new release for Svelte as lint parser, which is probably internal function, has type info, misjudging and providing insufficient type information in complex cases. I started looking a bit on the Svelte ESLint thing. Like the ESLint word, it's messed up. There's a bunch, like it's very, like you need to be prepared to if you want to deep dive into the Svelte, into the ESLint word in general. All right, so I think we have everything. We can take a look at the tracker. I don't think there is defer affecting pending boundaries. So it's just a failing test, nothing particular for the moment. Remove actions, permissions, monitor. Okay, so yeah, it's just some CI cleanup. This is something that I've been like procrastinating for a lot of time. I will get back to it, I promise. Yeah, the rest is mostly the same stuff. All right, so we now are we can now switch to the more interesting bit, specifically around like what again we're gonna switch to the more interesting bit where Ben is gonna showcase a bit of its expertise in the e18e word, and like we're gonna talk about supply chain attacks and stuff like that. So let me switch to Ben view, so to the guest view. Hi Ben.
Hey, thanks for having me this week.
You can hear us? Can you hear me? Can you hear us?
Yeah, yeah.
I also see that, like, I think you. So, do you have your screen as a webcam?
Can you see the screen I'm sharing here?
Yes.
With pre-process.
Basically, I see your screen twice, but as you, I mean, I think I'll figure it out. Okay. Let me see. Yeah, it's just because now currently, like your screen, it only shows up as a third person. Like it's not big in the stream. I don't know why.
Oh, that's not what I see. Oh.
Let me see. Can I? Sorry, guys. Let me see if I do this. I have no idea.
Let me see.
Highlight.
Let me try.
I mean, I can show your screen very big. Okay, now it's better. Can you hear us?
Yeah. But do you see my screen still?
Yes, I can see your screen, and now it's better.
Okay, great. All right, that's funny because on my side I don't see my screen at all. But that
really?
As long as we see it, I guess that's what's important. Hopefully, everyone else sees it too.
Yeah. Hi, Ben. How's it going?
Hi. Yeah. So now we get to talk about e18e and some of the efforts that Svelte has been making to clean up our dependencies. So there was just this big supply chain attack that happened, and I think that like one of the most straightforward ways to protect yourself from supply chain attacks is having fewer dependencies, and that's something that the e18e community, there's a whole group of folks working to reduce dependencies, especially in popular packages that you might be using. So, like when you set up a new project with SvelteKit, like with the Svelte CLI, and you choose, all of the different add-ons that you want. Like we want not only for Svelte to be small and dependency free, but we'd love for all of those add-ons to also be small and dependency free so that we don't eat up your disk space, but more importantly, so that you're not exposed to these supply chain attacks. And also when there is a bug in one of these things, it's a lot easier to debug if the bug is 2 levels deep in your dependency tree than when it's 7 levels deep in your dependency tree.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty nice. And I mean, in general, I think like since the whole E18 E18E sorry initiative started, I think like you did a pretty good job of cleaning up old dependencies, creating new packages that does the same thing of like a different package that has 200 dependency and stuff like that. And I think in general, like obviously this greatly benefits Svelte because like you are doing all of this because you want to clean up both Svelte dependency and the dependencies in for SV. But in general, I think it benefits the whole JavaScript ecosystem. I remember seeing uh, there is a CLI that kind of tells like if you use this package instead of this package, you are saving like 20 gigabyte a month from the web, which is pretty incredible if you think about it.
Yeah, there's a really great selection of tools that have kind of either been collected or have been built to help this initiative. So if you go to the E18e website, there's a tools tab on that website where you can learn about all the different tools that there are to help you find where the weighty dependencies are in your dependency tree. The one that's on my screen right now is NPM Graph, which is just a website that I use all the time. You can put in any open source package. You can put in like a specific version, like the latest version, or a historical version. You can put in a package.json, and then it'll draw for you this dependency graph. And oftentimes, like if a package is really big, a lot of that weight is just coming from one or two dependencies that's really big and need to be swapped out. And so, just identifying those and like having some awareness and asking those maintainers to prioritize that can make a really big difference.
Yeah, definitely. And again, I think like this is the perfect week to talk about it, and that's also why we brought it up, is that we've seen like this pretty big supply chain attack, and the risk is exactly that. Like you can see that in this graph there are like how many packages, like eyeballing at least 40 packages. Like if any one of these is compromised, like you are getting the compromised code in your PC, and you are running you are like at risk of running that malicious code but on your PC or on your user PC. And obviously, if you don't have those 40 packages, there are 40 entry points to your application, you don't have the same level of risk, right?
Yeah, and actually, and like this example is right here. This is, showing, I'll zoom in a little bit more so folks can see better, but this was Svelte pre-process 5 had, I don't know what it was, but 40 dependencies or something like that. And then, down in Svelte pre-process 6.02, we were able to get it to be dependency free. But here there's a handful of dependencies. I think there's like 5 of them that are shown with a kind of striped background. And that means that those dependencies were deprecated. So like not only are you at risk of supply chain attacks, but every time you install this package, you're going to be getting deprecation warnings. Even when the bugs get fixed, like you're going to be getting then security warnings that you need to update some package. And so it just creates a lot of work and churn for folks that might be depending on this, because it's not only the direct dependency, but every single one of the transitive dependencies you need to keep up to date. And it's just really a lot of wasted effort that you're not spending building your product or your software, and you're just doing this janitorial work of trying to deal with all of these different warnings that are generated by having so many dependencies.
Yeah, it's funny how like who cares about supply chain attacks? You get a warning.
Yeah.
It's much worse. So yeah,
I mean, it's definitely been like we've been going around the ecosystem trying to clean up all these different dependencies, and like something we hear very, very frequently is like, this is like a server-side package, or this is just developer tooling, so who cares? Like, who cares that like you're getting, like you're using up an extra 10 megabytes of disk space? Like, you know, that's like a penny worth of disk space. But I think, yeah, this past week really kind of shows the dangers of that type of thinking and how important it is to minimize dependencies, even if you're not shipping it to your users in the browser.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I kind of have the same, some of you may know that I recently started building a library for building MCP servers. And the reason why I did it is exactly for this. Like, the official SDK has some problems, I would say. Like, the fact, for example, that you install Express as a dependency, even if you don't use the HTTP server, like, which is wild. Like, you just get Express. And again, like, it's just on the server, so like technically it's not a problem, but I could not stand it.
Yeah, I think Express is a really great example because it's, you know, if you're building a server, that's basically the first thing that people reach for. It's kind of the de facto community standard, but it's also pretty big. Like, here, let's put it into NPM graph and see like how big, like how many dependencies does Express have? It's probably like 60 or 70, something in that range, I guess. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Here, you know, Express has 67 dependencies.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think a lot of times like folks don't necessarily put a lot of thought into like what dependency to use. It's just, you know, they kind of go for the most well-known, or, you know, the thing that the LLM is going to suggest is the thing that it sees in the training data the most, which is the thing that's the most used. Yeah. But, you know, there is a cost to just reaching for the first dependency that you come across. And I think like one of the really great things that E18e has done is created a list of common dependencies that are on the weightier side and a list of lighter weight alternatives. So, you know, if you do start looking into your dependency graph and you see like, hey, I've got this dependency that's like, you know, pulling in 67 dependencies, what do I replace it with? Like, how do I migrate my code? There's a really great list of guides in this module replacements repo. And so actually, let's see if Express is in here. It's not yet. I think there's an issue for it. There to add it, because I know a couple alternatives for Express actually are, Lukeed has a great package called Polka that we use in Svelte's adapter node. It's dependency-free alternative to Express that's API compatible. There's also H3, which is pretty lightweight. And so, you know, if you visit this repo, you can find that discussion and contribute to it and help identify packages that are API compatible and lighter weight. And, you know, again, like hopefully we can, like if we can clean up Express, I think that has the largest impact. And, you know, there are discussions ongoing with the Express authors about, you know, how can we make it lighter weight? Like, are there certain options that were offered historically that require us to add extra dependencies, but like if we look in the ecosystem, like these options aren't actually being used? Like, could they be moved to plugins or to user land? Like, how do we address that? And, you know, I think it's a difficult thing to do. Like, once you've already got a big install base, like you don't want to break your users.
Yeah, obviously.
But, you know, we're always talking to different authors about like, what can we do to help make those commonly used packages a little bit lighter to adopt. But yeah, so if you're looking for alternatives for some library, I think that, you know, going to the module replacements repo is a great place to start. You can find that through the E18 website. Like, all of these are going to be integrated into the website. There's an unreleased version of the website that has all of these. And so I think that's probably, if you just remember e18e.dev, that's probably the easiest place to go to check for these, and they'll be there in the future. So yeah, for this page that I've got up right here, it's talking about Chalk, and you can see that Chalk is a library that's used to color text on the screen, and we can punch it into the node modules here and see the node graph. Oh, well, they created a new version of Chalk that bundles all the dependencies, which I think is a little bit.
That's a cheating.
Yeah. So Chalk 4 had 5 dependencies, which isn't too bad, but still there's a lot of lighter weight alternatives. If you look at something like Pico Colors that has no dependencies, or there's also like Node has built-in API now as of Node 20. So that's even better if you can have 0 dependencies.
That's also pretty interesting. Like the fact that effectively, like a lot of these packages were created before, like a lot of like the runtimes are actually including those stuff. Like the SvelteKit is one of the example, but like there are a lot of packages that are supporting like Node version 0.0.4 just because in Node 0.0.4 there was no date constructor. Date is probably already there, but there are a lot of packages that are used just to be safe and to be back compatible. But the reality is that like nobody's actually using like a that old of a Node version, and so you can just use the built-in way of doing it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's another thing that the e18e community has tried to look at. So, in that module replacements repo, there's a list of probably hundreds of packages, or at least dozens of packages, where that functionality is now built into the platform and you don't need to use that functionality anymore. And so, these are all kind of made available, I think, as JSON, if I recall correctly, so that different tooling can use those. And so there's then like a number of command line tools that can pull in these lists, scan your node modules, your packages that you're using, and check, are there some of these older packages that are built into the platform that we like no longer need the package for, because now you can just use Node directly. And that's something that we're always keeping an eye out for. And SvelteKit itself, we're hoping to drop a number of dependencies in the next version. And, we're always talking to folks that contribute directly to Node to suggest APIs that we could add and that would allow us to drop even more dependencies. You mentioned e18e earlier, which is the one package I created that is in the Svelte dependency tree. And there's actually an open PR to add that functionality directly to Node, so that hopefully in the future, like no one will ever have a need for that package. I think that's probably right. Like if it were to be added today, it would have to get into Node 26, Node 28, Node 30 before authors can rely on it being there. Yeah. And so that's, a long path, and it might not be until 2030 that you get the benefit of that. But still, the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago, and the second best time is today. So
yeah. I think Enrico is also asking a question like, I wonder how bundling impacts NPM audit for this kind of packages with covered dependencies. Like, for example, Chalk, we saw before, like they are bundling. I don't think NPM audit can do anything there, right? Because if one of those bundled dependencies has a security, like NPM audit doesn't know that dependency is there, right?
Right. Yeah. NPM audit is not going to help you in that case. And so, like, that's one of the reasons that we've actually tried not to bundle dependencies as much as possible. You also, like, when the code is bundled, you can't dedupe it anymore. So, if two packages use the same dependency, if
You're gonna
those
get twice
packages
the
are not
code.
bundled, right? So you're going to end up including multiple copies of it because of the bundling. And so, there's a trade-off there. I think, like, that's one where, like, there are also benefits to bundling, though. Like, if you're using like one function, maybe it's better to have it bundled. Like, by pinning a dependency and bundling it, like, as long as that version is safe, you or your users are safe. Like, if one of the problems that, like, some of these supply chain attacks use NPM post-install or pre-install scripts, and those NPM scripts, aren't going to get run in a bundled dependency. So you're a little bit safer there. But we've also seen package managers trying to address some of these things. So, like, if you use pnpm, like, you now have to approve which packages can run scripts, which makes you a little bit safer potentially. Like, if there's some package all of a sudden starts asking to run a script, you can check, like, why is this asking to run a script? Like, is that really necessary, or is it because a malicious version with a script just got pushed out?
Yeah. Another question that I had is, like, how's been the reception from other maintainers? Because, like, for example, I know that the guys at Storybook, they loved E18e, and they actually did a wonderful job of cleaning up all the dependencies of Storybook. But I can imagine that some maintainers just doesn't want to change, doesn't care about that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, every maintainer has their own priorities, and, like, each project is used in a different way and has, legitimately, like, different reasons for prioritizing different things. And so, yeah, it's definitely, like, there are some maintainers that are more interested in cleaning up their dependencies than others. I think all we can do is work with those that are interested in cleaning up their dependencies, and, like, suggest lighter weight alternatives for packages that aren't willing to make that effort for whatever reason.
Yeah. Yep. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing that's kind of interesting to talk about too is some of the other things that we've been doing to improve the Svelte package security lately. So, all of the Svelte packages are now published with Providence, nearly all of them at least. So if you go to Svelte on NPM, you see this little green check mark next to the version. And what that says is that, like, this was published directly from GitHub, from the GitHub CI. It wasn't published, like, from
A local
some
machine, yeah.
rogue machine where, somebody got compromised credentials and then published a version of this from their laptop. That's not perfect security, but I think that, like, one of the things we've seen in some of these attacks is that packages are being published with Providence, and then when you see that disappear, that can be a warning sign.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, that's pretty hard to.
I wonder if that should probably be a warning on the npm CLI or pnpm CLI in itself. Like, if you're installing a new library and it loses the provenance, does it warn you?
Yeah, I definitely think it should be a warning sign. Today, there's not really anything that's done with that in an automated fashion, as far as I'm aware of. And so, it's good for kind of
Yeah, just when you install it for the first time. But I mean, who goes to check as npm
Right.
before running pnpm I tests? So like, I think there should be a, I think.
Yeah, and there are efforts to make that happen in a more automated fashion, and I think like having the ecosystem adopt this like gives their more incentive to build tooling around it. And so, that's one of the reasons that we've gone and added it to all of our packages. But you can see, like, I think there's, we use PNPM to develop Svelte and SvelteKit. And so that's what I keep most up to date with. But I know if you go to the PNPM repo that there's an open issue and discussion around it. And so, that's definitely something that we could potentially see happen in the future that would make everybody safer.
And by the way, like, it's not just provenance, but I think recently there was an effort for all Svelte repo to move to OEDC publishing, because before, like, it's actually a recent thing that was released by the NPM CLI. But basically, before, you kind of had to have an NPM token, an access token generated, and after the access token was generated, you could like, you had to have that as a secret on the repo. But this also meant like extra unsecurity. And with this new OEDC way of publishing, you are basically able to publish something from GitHub CI with provenance without the use of an access token, which is much more secure. And as of yesterday, I think all the repo in the Svelte repo are now using this new technique.
Yeah, that's something that folks were actively working on this week. It's a pretty new feature. I think maybe within the past few weeks or something that this was released. And so, it was something that we had been looking at and finally made it to the top of the backlog these past couple of weeks. And, basically now if you have a rogue GitHub action that's trying to steal your NPM token, or, a rogue actor somehow gets access to your CI, like, they can't steal your NPM token because it's not there anymore. So we've gone through and like deleted the usage of the NPM token from all the different Svelte repos and deleted it from all the repos in the GitHub organization. And when I say I didn't do any of this work, so I should, I think it's, Rich and Dominic and Simon and folks that were working on this.
Yeah. I think Rich actually removed the NPM token altogether from NPM. So if you stole the NPM token from Svelte, it's too late to use it.
Right. Yeah. And I think, everybody that uses Svelte is safer because of these efforts. And, hopefully, like, one of the really powerful things about having a smaller dependency tree is that, okay, now that we've implemented some of these measures for Svelte itself, like, we can start to look at some of our dependencies and see, like, hey, like, are there dependencies that are published without provenance? Like, should we try to contribute to some of those and like help them with some of the things that we learned? That's really impossible to do when you have 200 dependencies. It's not so hard to do when you have a dozen. And so, that kind of always, for me, priority number one has been just like reduce the number of dependencies, but then, that leads to kind of a magnification of all these other efforts as well.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you. I mean, mainly for your work on e18e, because that's the big part, or like the big thank that we owe you for, like, from the JavaScript community to you. But also thank you for joining me and showcasing this pretty interesting bit. And by the way, like, if you're worried about the recent supply chain attack, worry not, because like basically Svelte was safe from it, because every dependency that like it was compromised is never used in the browser where it actually makes sense to like where the attack was actually directed. So
Thanks. Yeah, I was really happy to get to share some of the E18e efforts today. And if you're interested in getting involved with any of this, you can go to e18e.dev to learn more.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And guys, thank you for joining us. And I hope you learned something. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Thank you.